Well, hello. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. Focal Point was a pop psych band formed in Liverpool in 1967. The band was the very first to be signed to the Beatles Apple Records the same year. Judging by the quality of scant material the band actually did record, the future had to look bright. What should have been the beginning of a successful musical venture was cut short by the mishandling by Apple's management and the fact that Apple hadn't yet established a record label. By 1969, the band had folded and members went off in different directions. For decades, Focal Point's discography consisted of just one single. But in 2005, all of the band's recorded output was recorded on the CD compilation First Bite of the Apple. Two of the original members of the band are here with me today, bassist Dave Slater and drummer Ted Hesketh. We'll talk about those heady days of the late 60s, but also find out more about pre and post Focal Point. Well, welcome, guys.
Thank you, Greg. Well,
how are you doing?
Good
to see you, Greg.
Doing well. You guys keeping well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, I finished my Apple Danish, so I've got some energy, Ted, to get on with the interview. Let's go back a ways, a few years. You both were born in Liverpool, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What memories do you have of your childhoods?
Ooh. Shall I start, Ted? I recall very young age because the war hadn't long been over, and I remember bombed out buildings, and we used to play in the bombed out buildings. For me, it was just a natural playground. But I'm guessing life was pretty tough for my family, and, we were pretty poor. Food rationing was still on when in my very early days as a result of the war. And those are the very, very early memories I have, probably the earliest memories I have.
So you playing in those bombed out buildings.
Kids just playing, we were kids just playing hide and seek or whatever the games were. We were making up as we went along, we were just all the time playing. And the bombed out buildings, the point I'm making is we never saw them as bombed out buildings. We just saw them as being a playground.
Oh, right.
Yeah, with a difference. Because Liverpool being a port was targeted by the Germans. And it was a major port in those days, and so it was, as I say, targeted by the Germans, and a lot of it was destroyed or damaged, and it took years and years to rebuild.
Yeah.
But I just don't remember. Obviously, I was after the war, so I don't remember anything about it.
Did your parents know you were playing around these places?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. Okay. How about you, Ted?
Well, very, very similar to Dave. I was born in the area of Liverpool called Anfield, which is like about a couple of minutes away from Liverpool Football Club's ground. And where I was born at home. I wasn't born in a hospital, and we lived in what was locally known as the Holy City, because a lot of the roads were religiously named. You'd have an Abbey Road, a Bishop Road, a Monastery Road, a Cathedral Road, and so on. So it was, Liverpool have always had, they've always had names and definitions for things,
Mm-hmm.
And the same as Dave, I can remember going with my mum every week to get with the rations, with the tickets to go and get food and so on. And same as Dave again. I played around bombed out areas. And yes, it was a playground. It was somewhere to go and play and pretend, you know, you're playing whatever, cowboys and Indians type of thing, kid stuff, you know. And it was decades and decades before Liverpool were able to start rebuilding a lot of the areas, you know. Because like Dave said, with it being a port, we were a major target and we were badly destroyed, you know. But at the same time, I always remember my childhood growing up as being really happy and safe. You could play out on the streets. You could be out on the streets at 8 or 9 o'clock at night with your friends. There was never problems, you know.
Right.
It was never. I never thought of it as being a problem, or even though Liverpool is known to be rough type of thing, it's no different to any other city where it's got its rough areas and it's got its really, really nice, classy areas, you know, with really nice houses and so on.
Yeah.
So the road that I lived in, there was only about 10 or 12 houses on the road. And I'm the only child. And I had a small circle of friends that I used to play with every day type of thing, you know. And it was, to me, I had a very, very happy childhood, you know, even before I got into music type of thing, which was a total accident, by the way. I never ever thought that I never had any aspirations to be a musician, you know. I mean, I can give you a quick story if you want, or if you've got more questions.
Sure. We'll get up to speed. We'll get up to that point, but I wanted to. It was a totally different time period back then, like you said. And
absolutely.
I take it that the houses, the doors were not locked, right?
No.
And, you know, and so people felt a lot safer. Yeah, it's wild. So you mentioned you know, talking about your childhood. Both of you, we'll take turns again. Do you remember music being played in the household when you were young?
Okay. Yep. Yes, I do. Yeah, from a very early age, my first memories are of big bands and records, 78 vinyl records, you know, and two of my uncles were in the military and had been abroad, and I worked with the American military and brought records back that we would never have dreamt of. I didn't even know about, and I'm talking about when I was about 7, 8 or 9 maybe. And I remember, so first up with the bands, like the jazz bands records, and we had a program on radio. I mean, we didn't have many channels in those days to listen to, but the one I remember was one where they had the Billy Cotton Band show on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it was Glenn Miller stuff as well. And I always remember. So it was a big band in the sun, you know, and like a Glenn Miller format band. And I always remember this in the Mood, a song called "In the Mood," and it was a really great jazzy, catchy number. So I danced around the piano stool to "In the Mood." That's my very, very first memories of music, and it went on from there. But as I said, my uncles were bringing records back from abroad. I'm going a bit forward now, Greg, to about, I don't know, 10 and 9, 10. And I remember hearing the first Elvis Presley records. And one of my uncles brought back 3, I remember it now to this day, 3 vinyl 78s of Elvis. And I remember when he put them on the record player, I was sold on it. Then I thought, I've never heard anything like this. And I remember the records, they were Jailhouse Rock, was one of them, Heartbreak Hotel, I think that was one of Elvis's very early ones. And the other one, Don't Be Cruel. I just remember those tracks, but they were on all the time, and that's really got really interested in it. I mean, the Beatles stuff comes later. I can tell you about that later, but you know, I'll.
Yeah.
There's a lot there, but that's my very early recollection of. It was the American music I was listening to. It was coming from abroad because we didn't get it here. We couldn't, you know, we didn't have the music here, much of it anyway in those days. The music I recall was pretty drab. British music then, it wasn't really particularly exciting. But then this guy Elvis Presley comes along, and I've never heard anything like it. It blew my mind, literally.
What about you, Ted?
Well, I can always remember in the house, my mum really would always have music on in the house all the time. We had a big old, what they call a radiogram, which is more like a piece of furniture, but had a great low end bass sound to it. I used to love cranking it up, the volume and everything. My dad wasn't so much, I don't remember my dad really being into music at all. Not that he disliked it, but he was neither here nor there about it. But my mum, like you said, Dave, Billy Cotton. I remember my mum used to listen to the likes of a black lady pianist called Winifred Atwell.
Yes.
And she was a great pianist. And I always used to remember listening to it, you know, and thinking it's fine piano playing, you know. But the type, it was mostly like male solo singers that my mum would listen to. Frank Highfield, Cliff Richards, that type of thing, you know. And so there was always music going on in the house, which I was just, I guess, taking it all in, unbeknownst to me, really. And I had a friend on the same street as me who was an art student in Liverpool. And he turned me on to Radio Luxembourg out of Germany, you know. And the music that was coming out of that was just amazing. More American than English stuff. But the main problem with Radio Luxembourg, the signal was really, really weak. So it would keep fading in and out. And, you know, so you would long for it to come back in again so you can carry on listening to whatever the song was, you know. But no, it was almost music in the house. And that, even back then, didn't really prompt me to think about becoming a musician, whatever the instrument may be, you know. There was never musical instruments in the house. I recall one uncle, he used to play an accordion, but that's about the only person in the family that I know was musically inclined in any way, you know.
Yeah, I just mentioned on that, because what I recall also, my mum really keen on country music. So I got to hear a lot of the country artists, because Liverpool is very, very much immersed in the country tradition. And country music was very, very popular here. And that does reflect in some of the Beatles' early stuff as well. And I do recall her playing quite an artist. Well, I didn't know them, but you know, I like the rockier stuff and the Elvis. But I do remember, like Ted said, that my mum too had the music on all the time. She listened to people like Jim Reeves, Frank Lachlan, you know, I think Tommy Wynette and people, you know, great artists, you know, but I was leaning more towards the rockier stuff.
Right.
I like the beat. I like the
Me too.
Well, talk about the first single or album that you ever got.
How about you, Ted? Can you? I don't know. I'll think about that one.
Okay.
I think one of the very first things I ever remember buying, was Wipeout by the Safaris. An instrumental, you know, very drum oriented, obviously. And this was still way before I became a drummer, you know. But I guess that kind of linked up with the Cliff Richards and the Shadows thing, being the Shadows when they weren't with Cliff was all instrumental music,
Right.
you know, and exactly the same. I'm exactly the same as Dave regarding the country music thing. You know, I never got into that type of music. It didn't appeal to me. Great musicians, great singers and songwriters, but that style never appealed to me. And it was when I started listening to Radio Luxembourg that I was hearing all this stuff coming out of the US. Didn't know half the artists at the time, but I enjoyed the music. You know, I guess it was late 50s, what they would call rock and roll, the likes of your Sam Cooke type of thing, you know, loved all that stuff, you know. Dwayne Eddy, American guitarist, you know.
Yeah.
I remember that being an early influence. Roy Orbison. See, it's all American stuff.
I
like Dave.
recall, I mean, the first album I think I got was, I think it was bought for me. I was at school and it was Del Shannon, Runaway.
Oh, God, yeah, loved it.
Yeah, and I thought that, I heard that Runaway, but it was 61, I think, that came out over here. And I heard that one on the radio, thought, wow, that is really, really something else. And so I got into stuff then, and that was the first album. It was bought for me because I couldn't afford it, you know, in those days. I got a thing called pocket money, and I couldn't have bought an album, and you know, and other things as well. So yeah, that was the first one I remember getting.
Yeah. I also remember
a CD version of it now.
Yeah. I also remember really getting into the Everly Brothers because I loved harmony.
Yeah. Right.
And still to this day, I still love harmony. And great songs, well written, but the harmonies just got to me, and I just really enjoyed that side of it.
Yes, I've heard that the Everly Brothers were heavily influential. I've heard that before. Definitely.
Yeah.
What about you mentioned the Beatles a little earlier. What other bands as a teenager did you guys like?
For me, a band that I really, really like. Well, two bands I really, really like out of Liverpool were the Swingin' Blue Jeans and the Big Three.
Right.
I remember the Big Three were just. I used to have an EP, which is a size of a 45 single, but it has 2 tracks or more on either side. And I used to have this EP that I must have worn it out on my mum's radiogram, and it was called Live at the Cavern. And they were doing the likes of Some Other Guy and stuff like that. And it was a great rocking feeling. I wore the thing out, and I wish I still had it to this day.
I had that too. Yeah, I remember that one. I had it.
Remember that? Yeah.
Great. Really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, Swingin' Blue Jeans, Hippie Hippie Shake. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing that for the first time.
The Escorts were another good band out of Liverpool. You know, there was back when I started playing. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was saying the Mastermind was the Liverpool band I used to watch sometimes on the Cavern as well, and they were one of their guitarists, Joey Molland, joined Badfinger.
Badfinger, yeah.
And he's in the States now. I think Joey's still around. I think. So I recall them being on we used to have the afternoon sessions at the lunchtime sessions at the Cavern, and you could see lots of bands there. And the Spooky Tooth, I remember seeing them there as well. They were quite a biggish band over here. I don't know about in the States, a big band over here, and quite a few bands. But that's I can't remember them all. But the Mastermind, pretty good.
That's what I was going to ask you guys. You remember the first concert or gig that you went to? Yeah.
Cavern for me. It was the Cavern I recall. About your big gig? I mean, I don't know. Yeah. Captain Beefheart on the stadium, Liverpool Stadium.
What year was that, Dave?
70, maybe 72, 71.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can remember my first concert that I went to see, believe it or not, was in 1965. I've still got my ticket, and I've still got the program, was for the Modern Jazz Quartet.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. in at De Montfort Hall in Liverpool, which was one of the campuses of Liverpool University. And once this friend of mine who was the art student, he turned me on to a lot of different types of music. And I can remember when I was about 12 or 13, when a lot of people were listening to the likes of Elvis and early Beatles and whatever else. I was listening to a lot of jazz. I got into especially a lot of jazz drummers with Art Blakey, Max Roach, Elvin Jones, and I started listening to a lot of jazz music, and I still do to this day. I love jazz. Can't play it to save my life, but I love jazz.
Well, I was going to ask you if you think that influenced your drumming at all, to listen to this music.
I would think, the way I look at it now, when I look back on it, I would think everything that I've listened to and every band that I've watched over the years since I started playing has influenced my style. I don't know what my style is. I really don't. I play to the music, whether I'm doing a rock gig, a country gig, or whatever, you know, or a recording session somewhere. I play for what I think is needed for that particular song, whether it's a ballad, mid-tempo, blues shuffle, whatever it may be. But I've just been influenced. Like I can see behind you, Greg, that you've got a large vinyl collection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm the same. I've still got a lot of vinyl that I love listening to. And a lot of it is very jazz oriented, you know. And so my style and influence, it's just everything I've watched and listened to and been a part of in different bands over the years. You know,
I can recall now my earliest gigs, well, concerts, was in fact the Beatles.
Really?
Yeah, it was it's just come back to me now. They were on the Empire Theatre, and it was their last gig, their last date before they were moving down to London.
Okay.
They had Love Me Do, was out, didn't do that great, but it got them noticed a bit, and it did get in the charts here. But the next one, Please Please Me,
yeah,
it took off. And so they were getting too big for Liverpool, you know, basically. So they had to go down south. That's when they get one down there. But I remember going to the concerts. You know, we have connections with Paul McCartney's family, and we got free tickets to go and see them. I say we, my parents and I, you know, went to see them along with Paul's family. And that was the very earliest gig I ever remember going to. I was still at school, I think, at the time. But the next one after that was Bob Dylan. And I went with Tim, who did keyboard player and focal point. We saw Bob Dylan again at the Empire. It was his first tour over here, but he'd just gone electric, you know, with his Bring It All Back home, and Highway 61. And he came over. I think no other band were with him. I think they were. And so
they were.
Yeah, they were sensational, you know. Yeah, but they were the first couple of concerts I can recall going to.
Let me ask you, speaking of the Beatles in concert, when you saw them, could you still hear them? Because I've heard stories about the fans screaming so loud, especially the girls, that they couldn't even hear themselves playing.
I can't recall, to be honest with you, Greg. I don't, probably not. I don't know. I just remember being lost in the excitement of it all. You know, this is the very first concert I've been to, you know.
Yeah.
And it really just, the whole thing was atmospheric. But I'm sure they were screaming at them. Yeah, well, they were basically screaming not to leave Liverpool. They didn't want to. They were Liverpool's biggest band for years, you know, but they couldn't last. Obviously, they were just outgrowing Liverpool in terms of their success, and it would have been a matter of time anyway. But yeah, it's chaotic.
Yeah, chaotic. Well, we'll start. Dave, with you, when did you pick up the bass? When did you start?
Well, I started music very early. I started on the clarinet at school. I learned to read music, and I then got into the band, and orchestra band, and then played for a band in Liverpool, the clarinet. And then I transferred to saxophone because a bit later on, never took to the saxophone. bass came along, really. I think I could recall. I was very close to Tim, keyboard player. We were at school together.
Mhm.
And we went from school, and we were still, I think, just not long left school. And we thought, let's get a band going. Let's get something going. We got a drummer. It was Tim and myself. I said, right, well, we need a bass player. I said, okay, I'll do it. And that was as simple as that. Influences later on, of course, really did I had to try and up the game, because McCartney's bass playing, very melodic, loved his bass playing. And then, of course, 70s, we had James Jameson, the Motown sound, and he set the benchmark for bass playing, way beyond me. But yeah, so early on, so I would guess it was, and we were just literally playing for ourselves. My first bass, I think, was a Hofner. I recall some huge semi-acoustic Hofner bass, and I don't know how I got hold of that, but where I got it from, and I can't remember now. Probably bought for me, but because I was, as I say, about 15 at the time. And then we got advanced to playing in advanced. We got a singer in, and then we started to play, and the drummer got. He only had a side drum at the time, and so he needed to improve his drumming. Yeah, we all knew after the game of playing music. But then we started to play local pubs and working men's clubs, and as they were then. And so we were making a little bit of money there, tiny bits of money, but not a huge amount. But that was that's where I cut my teeth, really. Liverpool, playing in the social clubs, working men's clubs in Liverpool, and pubs as well. We used to have lots of pubs in Liverpool in those days.
They still have.
Not as many though, Ted, are there?
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, when did you start drumming?
Well, I can't believe how close Dave and I are in how we started. Mm-hmm. I had a couple of close friends that I used to go to school with. This is about 1960. And I can remember it as clear as if it was yesterday. We came home from school one day in the summer, walked home from school, and we stood outside one of the guys' houses, and you started talking about how popular the Beatles were getting. And everybody in those days, it's like, I want to be a musician. I want to be a musician. I want to do this. And so we were standing outside the house one day after school, and both of the guys played guitar. One had, I believe it was a Watkins Rapier, which is an electric guitar, and it was basically just a cheap copy of a Fender Stratocaster. Mm. And the other guy had an acoustic guitar. And they said, why don't we start a band? And I'm just sitting there listening to them talking, and they said, what are we going to do for the drummer? And I just turned around to them and said, I'll be your drummer. It was as simple as that. I opened my big mouth, and not knowing, because then I didn't know how to play drums. I didn't own any drums. I liked listening to music, So we left it at that. And I walked home because they lived 2 doors away from each other, and I lived about 5 minutes from them. And I'm walking home and I'm thinking to myself, what the hell did I just talk myself into? I'm not a drummer. And I can remember the first drum I ever owned, my parents bought for me, and it was just a small snare drum on a stand. It was a red glitter drum and a little arm coming out from the side with a cymbal that was, 8 inches in diameter, but it was brand new, and it meant the world to me, and from then on, I just started listening more and more to music. And it was mostly when we started playing as a band, so-called band, again, it was mostly instrumental music. Nobody could sing in the band, and we never thought initially about getting a singer in the band. It was just like, okay, let's form a band. So it just went on from there. I don't recall how the heck we progressed, but we did, you know. And I guess subconsciously, looking back on it now, I would just listen a lot more intently to music, and specifically the drums, and listening for the beat and so on, and trying to copy it. You know, I mean, going back to that Big Three live at the Cavern, the EP, you know, I knew that those 4 songs on that EP, I knew them inside out, you know, because I just played them and played them until I got it right, or what I thought was right at the time, you know. So that's how I got started in music. You know, I didn't intend to become a drummer or a musician. But here I am now.
Well, the band that you were speaking of, was that the Maracas, or was that later?
No, that came I would say about 2 years later.
Okay.
Because Dave Rhodes, who was one of the singer-songwriters at Focal Point, he was in the Maracas, but that was before my time joining them. You know, because they were a 5-piece band originally. I'm still in touch occasionally with the bass player from the band, who still lives in the UK, just outside of London, you know. And when I joined the band, it was down to a 4-piece. So there was just lead guitar, rhythm guitar, bass guitar, and drums, you know. Because back in those days, before keyboards came along, you know, the expected lineup of any bands, whether you were playing instrumental or vocals, was lead guitar, rhythm guitar, bass guitar, and drums, you know. So I guess obviously when keyboards came along, that kind of, the rhythm guitar kind of faded away from bands. I guess it went out of style, you know. But I can vividly remember when I joined the Maracas, they had this old Comma van, a green colored van, and it was covered from top to bottom with girls' lipstick saying, "I love so-and-so, I love this," you know. And I can, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't admit to this, but I can remember being really jealous when I joined the band because my name wasn't on the band, you know. So I remember one day I borrowed one of my mum's lipsticks, and I started writing "I Love Ted" by Joan or whatever, you know, on the van. I know.
It's all coming out now, Ted.
Well, thank goodness you didn't put "I Love Ted" by Dave or something like that.
I didn't know Ted then. Yeah, maybe I would have done that. Who knows? Well, I didn't get to know Ted till a bit later.
Well, Dave, were the Top your first band?
Yeah, first band that was getting regular gigs in Liverpool. Yeah, and we would play outside Liverpool. We play the Northwest region. We play in Wales, North Wales as well. We were busy all the time. You know, I think we all had jobs as well, but in our spare time, in our days off, we'd always be playing. And we mainly the music then. I'm going a bit ahead of Ted, I think, here, because mainly I recall we used to play mainly. They were already an established band in Liverpool, and I was asked to join them. And Tim also, the keyboard player, was asked to join them as well. Tim Wells. So we joined the band. Tim on keyboards, myself on the bass. So we had the lead guitar, rhythm guitar still, and a drummer, and the lead guitarist was the lead singer. And it was mainly Motown, soul music, the very early stuff. Impressions we did the Motown stuff as well, and the popular stuff in the clubs. Liverpool clubs by that point were really, you couldn't go anywhere without listening to Motown music. It was very, very popular. And that was really what we were doing then. And I can take it forward if you want to when I first made contact with Focal Point, if we want to go there.
Well, sure. I wanted to ask first Ted about his drumming style being compared to Keith Moon, and his appearance and his look.
I
What did you think? What did you think of that?
I think the only connection with Keith Moon that I can think of that I feel connected to was he actually played my drums one time at a club downtown in Liverpool called the Blue Angel.
Okay.
And like Dave said earlier, the Liverpool Empire was the main theatre where a lot of major bands and artists came through when they came to play in Liverpool, would play at the Empire. And I was playing with, I was with the Maracas then, and we were playing at the Blue Angel Club, and you go in on the ground floor level where there was a bar area, but you went down to the basement where there was a really small stage. And I remember playing in there just as a regular gig one night with the Maracas. And we heard some rumors that Keith Moon might be coming down to the club, you know, as a guest, I guess, to have a few drinks after he played the concert at the Empire, you know. So next month we see these two really big bouncers or his bodyguards, whatever, kind of frog marching him downstairs to the basement. He couldn't stand up. He was so out of it, you know. And of course, with it being Keith Moon, everyone, as soon as they recognized him, said, oh, get Keith Moon up to play. So the bands said, you know, okay, let's bring Keith Moon up, you know. No thought of asking me, do you mind if Keith Moon plays your drums, you know? So sure, no problem, you know. And he ended up getting up playing whatever tune it was. He played a couple of tunes, and I had a small 4-piece drum kit. And after he'd left with his minders and whatever, you know, I noticed that my main cymbal just had an enormous crack right through it. He just absolutely trashed. So I wish I had it these days. I could have got him to sign it, you know. But as far as style goes, I don't know. I always liked The Who as a band. And I used to like, I know a lot of people way back used to say, you know, Mooney was too erratic and he wasn't a good drummer. But you listen closely to the Who recordings. He was actually a very good drummer.
Yes,
you know, he was erratic, sure he was, you know, but he put a lot of life into those tunes that he played, you know. I mean, the likes of my generation, I wore that single out. I played it so much, you know. But I don't know, as far as style goes, I never purposely tried to copy anybody, I think, that I can think of, maybe subconsciously somewhere down the road. I don't know. You know, the only drummer I can think of that I used to, I guess, pinch some of his licks and his style was Ginger Baker from Cream.
Okay.
You know, where he played a lot of sort of tribal tom-tom patterns on his drums, you know. And I always liked that type of thing. So I, at some point, would incorporate that into my playing. But I've never gone out of my way to try and literally copy somebody.
Right.
Because I don't know, my style, I don't know how to class myself. I am a drummer that can play different styles, you know. And these days now playing, I guess my main focus is on playing the groove and playing in the pocket. You know, I'm not a technical drummer, never have been. I totally appreciate a lot of guys who are just technically just on another level from another planet. And I love going watching those guys. But for me, no, it's about making everybody else in the band feel comfortable and keeping the tune going without speeding up, slowing down, and at the same time putting my take on it. You know, even if you're just doing cover tunes in a band, you know, I'll play them the way they affect me.
There you go. There you go.
You know.
Well, you and Dave were, you know, the backbeat, the rhythm section.
Yeah.
Dave, do you want to get us up to speed? You were mentioned earlier about how you guys met and the forming of Focal Point?
I didn't know Ted then, and yeah, and we were playing the Top were playing a gig at the 149 Club in Kensington, which is a suburb of Liverpool, and we were there. We were a regular band there, and there was this night, I was 67, I think, and we were playing, and I noticed these two guys coming in, and one of them was wearing what I call a caftan, like a hippie kind of thing. You know, it was very colourful, furry collar, long. And I'm thinking, and I'm still on stage playing, of course. I'm thinking, no, he looks very unusual. I'm not for Liverpool, that was unusual. But it was the time of the Beatles. We were going into the psychedelic period, if I could call it that. You know, Sergeant Pepper was just down the road, and Pink Floyd were making their mark, I think, then as well. And but it was still unusual. So the two of them, and I know, and so in the break, the gig, they came over to myself and Tim, and they said, "Look, we'd like you to join our band. We've got this contract with Apple Publishing. Brian Epstein wants us to form a band around the songs that they had, about 67 songs then, what I recall, demos." And he said, and this was Paul Tennant I'm talking to now. He was in the caftan. He was the one who was dressed in the gear. You know, it was really. And he said, "Yeah, we'd like you to join the band." Ted wasn't with them at the time, but Dave Rhodes was. So it was just Paul and Dave Rhodes. They approached us. "We'd like you to join the band. We've got a name. It's going to be called Focal Point, and that's Brian Epstein's name. And he wants us to get the band down to London and do some recordings down there." So we thought about it for a few minutes, and then, yep, we signed up there and then. You know, it sounded just so interesting and exciting. I can't recall when Ted and I first met, whether it was down there or up here in Liverpool at the time. We didn't play. We went. I wasn't. You know, I was still playing regularly with the other band, and so I think we all headed down. I don't know. Eventually, we got a van. I think that's how we call it. I don't know. We went down in the van. Yeah, it's coming back to me now. What we did basically, they'd organise this beat up old van, and that's probably when I first met Ted. And we never played together.
No.
First time we played together was when we were doing the demos, I think, in Baker Street, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
I think you're right there, Dave. I think you're absolutely spot on.
But I remember we were going to, so we'd all be getting collected in this van with Paul Tennant, Dave Rhodes, Ted, and Tim and I then joined them. And then we said, well, we'll probably need a road manager. We didn't have one. So what we did was, somebody said, "I know one, Brian Rooney." And Brian, okay, where does he live? Well, we went, so somebody knew where he lived, pulled up outside his door, knocked on the door. He comes to the door, he's just got out of bed, middle of the day, and he's looking bleary-eyed. "Brian, we're going to London. We'd like you to be our roadie. We're signing up to Apple. Give me a second." So he nips back in, puts his shirt on, into the van, and we just trundle off down to London. Because at that point, Apple was renting us a house. I forget the name of the place now. Wistful Street, a place called Wistful Street in North London. And so that's how I first got to know the rest of the band. I didn't know, other than, you know, partly Tim was my closest friend then, because we've been together for years, playing music in school together. But that's how I met the other guys going down in the van. And I met Paul, obviously, and Dave Rhodes at the gig, the 149 Club.
Wow. Were you aware at the time that you were the first band signed to Apple?
I don't remember. I don't recall that, to be honest with you, Greg. No.
Yeah.
No, no, I don't remember that being said.
Okay.
But the Beatles were always a huge influence for me, like an inspiration, really, if you like, for the music, getting involved in the music more so, and starting to play. I always was a big admirer of the Beatles. And so McCartney's melodic style always appealed to me. I like their music very much, and to this day I still do. But yeah, that's probably And then we got to London, but I didn't know. No, the first I recall, we went down there, didn't we? And we stayed over in John Lennon's house, I think. Terry Doran was the musical
Right.
director, he was the MD. And Terry was up from up here in Liverpool as well. And he was the MD for Apple. They had their offices were in Baker Street in central London. And I recall on the way down there, we stopped over in John Lennon's house. John Lennon wasn't in the country at the time, I don't think. And the house was a big, obviously you imagine in a place called Wadebridge in Surrey, which is stockbroker belt. It's really, really affluent area. And we stayed there overnight, I think, Ted, from what I recall. And the next day we headed into London, into the offices at Apple. And I recall them being introduced to Terry Doran then. And then we moved into the house in Whistler Street. And then that was our base. But then from every day, I got to know him really well. We were living hand to mouth, really, weren't we? In the house in Whistler Street, we didn't have much. There wasn't much by way of money, but we were living hand to mouth, really. And then every day going into Apple and recording from, I don't know, about midday, 1 o'clock-ish, right the way through into the evening. I do recall that, and we did that for quite some time. An interesting thing about the roadie, Brian, who we just picked up on, within 5 seconds. Yep, let me get a shirt on, I'll be with you. He went home when we returned to Liverpool, when the whole thing imploded with Apple. Brian went on to roadie with Procol Harum. So we got into the really big stuff. And I think his last gig was with Donna Summers. He was I don't know if he was a road manager with her, but he worked with her for quite some years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and Ringo Starr. He was working with Ringo in some kind of, I don't know what it was, but Richie Rooney Enterprises they were called. Because Ringo's name is Richie.
Well, you mentioned recording at Apple. Do you have any memories? When you first stepped into the studios, was it kind of intimidating?
Ted, what about you?
Okay, well, I can. Oh, by the way, it was number 48 Whistler Street we lived in.
It was correct. Yeah.
I still have memories now of that place. It felt like it was Jack the Ripper area. But no, I can remember, like Dave said, we used to rehearse up on the 3rd floor, the top floor of Apple in Baker Street. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, didn't we have a couple of 4-track reel-to-reel tapes? Tape recorders?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
I don't recall what I had in the way of a drum kit, whether it was my own. I don't think it was. But I do remember when we went to record the singles, well, the 4 tracks that we did at Decca's number 2 studio. I remember it being a smaller studio than I thought it would be, because Decca's number 1 studio was mostly for the likes of the bigger artists, the likes of the Rolling Stones, who with Decca back then would record in the number 1 studio. My own recollections of when we recorded Love You Forever and Sycamore Sid and the other 2 tracks, I can remember when we recorded Sycamore Sid, and I don't know who suggested it, that I didn't play hi-hat or cymbals on that track. I just played bass drum and snare drum, like playing flams on the snare. Because when I listen to the song now, there's no signs of any cymbals in there whatsoever.
Right.
And I don't know whether that would have been Wayne Bickerton, who was producing it back then, or whether it may have been Lionel Morton suggested it. I don't know. Right. But it seemed to be, didn't seem to take that long. I don't recall doing too many takes on each of the tracks at all. Whether it be, as I say, Love You Forever or Sycamore Sid and so on. Obviously, a young person back then, I felt intimidated by it, certainly. But I tried to put it to the back of my mind, thinking, okay, we've got to record here. And I tried to just focus on playing the tunes. You know, obviously Love You Forever was a slow tempo ballad compared to Sycamore Sid. But other than that, obviously I must have been intimidated. I mean, who wouldn't be back then? You know, at a young age, you're in a recording studio. And but other than that, I don't recall I don't recall too much about the recording sessions.
Okay.
I prior to them, I don't feel the intimidation as much, perhaps, because we've been playing in the Apple studio,
True.
Top floor, and so you know the material was really not just the 4 tracks we did for Decca, but a number of other songs as well that the guys had written. And I don't remember. So by the time we got in the studio, I don't recall it being that intimidating. The only thing it did, I do think now, we're thinking back, what did intimidate me, being on the bass, was that Wayne Bickerson was also a bass player, and he was the producer stroke, you know.
That's true. Yeah.
And Wayne was working with Pete Best prior to, when he was doing live gigs, he was playing bass for Pete Best, ex-Beatle drummer. And so I remember that. I'm thinking, oops, I hope he doesn't pull me up on anything here, you know. We're talking about intimidation, maybe that. But in fairness to Wayne Bickerson, he didn't change a thing. I don't recall that.
Okay.
I do know in those days, what I do recall, very much so, of course, it was 4-track, I think, wasn't it, Ted, we were working on, I think. And if you did fluff it, you know, you'd have to start again.
Absolutely.
You couldn't just drop in as they do now. You know, you can just drop in. You do a bum note, you know, we'll drop in a few bars before, and you'll do it again. Just do that little bit that you got wrong. No such thing then. You have to get it right, or you'd have to do it all again.
I know.
Sessions themselves, I think. Go on, sorry.
So something's just come to memory with me now. I'm glad we're having this meeting. So my memory's starting to open up. I do recall probably around 64, maybe 65, when I was still with the Maracas, we had a manager called Kim Pemberton, and he knew a lot of people, and he always was getting us gigs, good gigs, opening up for major names and so on. And but on one occasion, he took us down to London, somewhere in North London on the Holloway Road, to Joe Meek's recording studio. I think you remember Joe Meek recording the Tornadoes with Telstar.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember going in with the Maracas into the studio. It was above a men's clothier's shop, and it was up on the 2nd floor. And I don't recall what we recorded, but I remember Joe Meek was a real oddball character, very oddball, and very, very impatient person, you know. And I guess that was my first time in a recording studio, a proper recording studio, because that's where he recorded Telstar by the Tornadoes. And I probably wasn't intimidated then, because I didn't know any better.
Right.
You know, I was just in a band, and like Dave said, we just played whatever songs, and we played them and played them and played them. So it's like we were more than prepared and rehearsed when we went in to play the songs. So it's not like we had to learn things on the go, you know. So I guess when the Focal Point recording sessions came along, like I said, sure, I must have been intimidated because you're in a major recording studio, and it's a big deal for the young kid, you know. But I wasn't as intimidated, you know. I still listen back to the music now that we did, and I'm quite proud of what we did back then. I really am. I listened to the songs, and like you say, Dave, there was nothing digital then. No Pro Tools, no click tracks, nothing, you know. And when you listen to that, whether it be Love You Forever or whatever, from start to finish, the tempo is pretty spot on, I think, you know. But no,
They are-
it's
they're good. They're great quality. They're, you know, tracks. You're right. You know, and very accomplished. You know, I have to say.
Appreciate that.
You guys would borrow equipment from the Beatles, right?
I took my own bass down there with me, Greg. I had at that point I had my Fender Precision, and I used that on the sessions. But in terms of amplification, yeah, the Beatles. We were told when we were getting prepared for. They were prepared once that we recorded the tracks, and then Decca signed us up, and we knew what the single was going to be. And they were going to do a promotion for us in central London, in the West End, and it was, I forget exactly where it was now, but somewhere in the West End, and we had to play live. But all we were going to do was play the 4 songs, but it was for the press, the music journalists, and radio, and so it was a big deal, and so we had to get kitted out in equipment because we hadn't played live at that point, and in front of an audience, that is, and we had to get kitted out with clothes as well. And I recall we so they said, like, we'll go to the Vox and we've got factory, and you'll choose what you want. So it was like being, as kids in a candy store, really. It was all fantastic equipment. You think, wow. And it was this solid state, and it was fairly new at the time. We're moving away from the valve amps, and so we all chose what we wanted. A PA system as well, and that's what we got to use for the actual promotional gig we did in London. But the clothing was an interesting one, because none of us had the clothes and that. But I remember being in the Apple at the time, as Ted mentioned, we were on the 3rd floor, and all the recording gear was on the 3rd floor. But in the basement of Apple was a boutique. They'd opened a boutique there, and so they said, I don't recall the other guy, but somebody said to me, go down to the basement, choose some clothes you want for your gig. And so I went down there, and I'm standing there looking at the stuff, and standing next to me, with me almost, is Ringo and his wife, then Maureen. And I don't remember what we were talking about. We had a brief chat about something or whatever it was, and then I just chose the gear for the gig. But we were bumping into the Beatles there all the time. I do recall that they were regularly in and out of Apple at those days. That was before. Well, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but this is 68 I'm talking about now, and I think that the writing was probably already on the wall to a certain extent, that things weren't going well between them and financially Apple, because they were hemorrhaging money. It wasn't making money, the organization at that time. But I do remember, that's what I do recall, the getting the gear provided to us, the amplifiers, the bass itself. As I say, I had my own bass guitar, and the clothes I got from the Apple boutique. That was just given to you.
Wow. Well, Terry at that time, I guess he started spending more time with Grapefruit, the band Grapefruit, than with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. He did.
You kind of dropped down maybe a rung or two in the priority.
Yeah, Grapefruit came along. I mean, I remember getting on well with Grapefruit. They were good guys. We got on well with them. Part of the Apple stable at the time, the publishing stable at the time, still didn't have a record company or record outlet at that time. But Terry became more involved with Grapefruit because John Lennon was giving a lot of his time to Grapefruit as well.
Okay.
They were named after Yoko Ono. I don't know, it was a book she put out or something she put out, and called Grapefruit. And so the focus was then on Grapefruit. And no doubt they had some really good commercial songs at the time. I thought, this is good stuff. And so I thought they'll be big. It didn't happen for them the way I thought it would, but yeah, there was the shift was over to Grapefruit, and the shift to Grapefruit happened before we played our big gig in front of the press. and the music industry, as it were, because Terry Doran didn't turn up for our gig, which was the major thing. You know, it was a big deal. This was the biggest thing for us. This was the platform to set us on our way with the record, and he didn't turn up for that. And so you could say then, I guess the writing was probably on the wall even then, before the record was released.
Right. Do you recall, speaking of that launch party, do you recall anything from that party? Any memories?
Yeah, I remember I was nervous about that one. I don't know about you, Ted. That did make me nervous. And we got through the songs. I don't know how we got through them, and I don't remember much about what playing, but it must have been okay. I do remember interviewing people who wanted to interview us, you know, and I remember Paul particularly being the main guy in the band. He was interviewed by a number of people for radio, and I just remember it being, you know, it was atmosphere was great. People were enjoying themselves, perhaps enjoying ourselves a bit too much, I think. But I have very sore head the next day, from what I recall. But all in all, I thought it went well. The night went well. That's what I thought anyway. And the bottom line was, you know, we were young lads, and this was, you know, we're flattered to be here, you know, in London. I remember blowing up life-size and bigger studio photographs of us. As we walked into the reception area of where we were playing, they were right away along the hallway, like wallpaper size, photographs of the band, the promotional stuff that had been done, I guess, by Apple on behalf of Decca for the release of the single. So I thought, wow, you can't get much better than this. Big mistake.
Right. Well, how about you, Ted? What were your memories of that party?
Probably less than Dave's.
You did enjoy yourself.
As I say, I can remember going in, and where it was some sort of an event or function hall, but we were up on the second floor, and I recall the larger than life size photos of each member of the band, and I recall it being quite a high stage with all the equipment set up, and there were a lot of bright lights and so on, and we played the 4 songs, got through them fine, and again, it was over before we knew it. I mean, 4 songs at like 3 minutes a song, 4 minutes at the most. You know, how long does that take to do? Even talking to the audience in between. So for me, it was over before it started. You know, it's there was obviously a lot of alcohol there, but I remember it going well. But after that, I don't remember much, because like Dave said, things started to go downhill. And I think between the fact that Brian Epstein had died and the Beatles not really being that good business-wise back then, from what I recall, is why things just went down the drain, you know. And we were kind of getting less and less attention all the time from Terry and whoever else. And, you know, Grapefruit started getting the attention, but then, you know, that didn't pan out for them in the long run. You know, it's it's a shame. I always look back on it now as being not in the right place at the right time. I think we were in the right place just outside the right time. You know, because if Apple hadn't have imploded the way it did, or Brian Epstein was still with us now, I think it would definitely. And I'm not just saying that hopefully something good could have happened, but I think we would definitely have done fairly well, because we had good songs, original material. You know,
we didn't get on the road, did we? We didn't get on the road. We didn't have a manager of sorts.
No.
You know, to take us down the road, to sharpen the band up as a really good live band. We didn't get that. We didn't get that far. And later years, yes, I was continued in the band, and we did get a much tighter band going, and we were a live band. But in those days, we hadn't played the clubs. We had individually, but not as a unit, as focal points. And that was missing as well. We really, if you know, it may have been benefited us if we had been a live band. We could go out and promote the material, but you know, it wasn't to be. At the end of it all, it wasn't to be.
Yeah. Well, you guys do still, you know, you did have the 4 songs recorded for Darren. Never Never, Girl in the Corner, Love You Forever, and Sycamore Sid. My favorite of the 4, and I don't hear very much about this one, is Girl in the Corner. That's my favorite of those.
Yeah.
What's your take? What's your take on that song?
I think it's a very, very good song. In fact, Never Never and Girl on the Corner, they were all good songs for the time back then. You listen to them now and it's like the melody was there.
Yeah.
You know,
Girl on the Corner is my favorite.
Right. It was a good pop song, you know. I mean, I think in all honesty, nobody really wanted Love You Forever as the single or the A-side.
Right.
You know, but we didn't have a lot of say-so in that.
Yeah.
You know,
neither did Apple. It was in the hands of Decca.
Right.
Of course,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would have every week they would have their meeting around the board table in the boardroom, and the executives in the suits would turn around and decide, this is what we want out this week. We'll have this one. We'll have that one. And when they listened to our stuff, they said "Love You Forever" as the most potential to be a seller.
Yeah.
And that was their choice, regardless of what we thought, regardless of what McCartney thought of any of them, and it'd be Apple. It wasn't to be. It was going to be. They wanted "Love You Forever" out, and that was it.
That's a very familiar story in the history of music, where the executives really don't have an ear for music a lot of times. You know, put their nose in and say, we're going to go with this, rather than the musicians deciding it.
Well, you bear in mind, Greg, Dick James was still head of Decca then, and Decca turned down the Beatles, didn't they, originally? So,
right.
I tell you, maybe something.
Very clever guy, right?
Mostly.
I can quickly show you Decca's #2 studio where we worked. Do you remember this album?
Oh, yes. I have that one. I think I still have the vinyl. I think I still have.
This is the original one. Well, if you look on the back of it, that's Decca's #2 studio.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right.
And that's where this album was recorded, in that studio.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay.
Just an aside, prior to Focal Points, the band I was in, one of the bands we gigged with Mayo and in Nantwich in Cheshire, and
was it the Civic Hall?
We were on before them, the Civic Hall, yeah.
I remember.
And it was the first outing for Mick Taylor. He just replaced Peter Green as the lead guitarist, and it was their first gig with Mick Taylor. And I thought then, wow, I think it was a 17-year-old guy, and I thought, hey, he is good. He's really good. Probably not up to Clapton's technique at that point, but really, really, really good. And he proved to be so, didn't he? And got the Stones in the end. That was his next gig, the Stones.
Well, talking about Nantwich Civic Hall brings another another memory to mind. When going back to the days with the Maracas, I'd say our manager, Kim Pemberton, he got us a lot of good gigs and a lot of opening gigs for major artists. And I can recall at Nantwich Civic Hall, we opened for The Move.
Yeah.
Right? Which had Roy Wood in the band, which was the precursor to Electric Light Orchestra.
Yes.
It was a recorded band. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, what a brilliant band they were. Weren't they good?
And then on De Montfort Hall, where I saw the Modern Jazz Quartet, as the Maracas, we opened up for Pink Floyd and 10 Years After. And I clearly remember to this day, especially 10 years after, they were great really good bunch of guys. At the end of the gig, when all the audience went home, we were sat on the edge of the stage. It was like sitting on the dock and dipping your feet into the water because it was a high stage. And we sat there with Alvin Lee and the rest of the guys after 10 years after, just chit-chatting away, you know. And got a lot of experience to see other bands performing who were major artists, you know. I guess it helped me a lot as a musician, because I was always watching everybody, and not just the drums, you know. I was watching all the different musicians and so on. And I guess I would soak all that in over the years, you know. I can remember playing at the Cavern Club one time when Chris Farlow and the Thunderbirds were there, and he had a 16-year-old Carl Palmer on drums, you know. And it's just, he looked like young, and he had a big double bass drum kit, and he didn't even look 16, you know. And it was just a great gig, and it was a great atmosphere. So you soak up a lot of that sort of stuff.
Yes, you do. I wanted to backtrack just a bit, and I want you to hold that album up that you were showing.
Oh, this one?
Yes, because Sycamore Sid is a good song, and the vocals really sound like Syd Barrett, but the song is not actually about Syd Barrett, it's about John. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
John in his tree house. He lived in a tree.
right.
Yeah, he actually did live in a tree for a while. Yeah, and that's where they got the inspiration for that one.
That's very.
I have a quick question for Dave.
Oh.
Were you ever involved in any of the songs that Focal Point recorded?
Yeah.
Not just the 4 that we recorded.
Yeah. Fun Out of Friends and some others as well. They always talk about the 60s now. But Focal Point did stay together. I say we stayed together. Ted Wett left the band. Dave Rhodes left the band. And when we got back to Liverpool, there was myself and Paul and Tim, and we continued. And Wayne Bickerson signed myself and Paul up to a songwriting contract with Odyssey Music and Stoke State Music. And the deal was that he would give the studio time when we needed it, and he published the songs that we were recording if you wanted to like them enough. That's why I can recall that. But that was in the 70s now. This is when we're back in Liverpool. This is after it fizzled out in London, you know, and Apple was imploding. We were getting nowhere. And in the end, the record didn't do anything, of course. And I do remember with the record, though, if I can tell you this one anecdote I've got here, which I thought was really interesting. I remember we were told there was only really one radio station, and it was called BBC Radio 1. I know Luxembourg was still around then, of course, but Radio 1, you had to get your record on Radio 1 to get any chance of getting out there to the wider world, you know? It had to be. And we were told, I vividly remember this, the DJ called Alan Freeman, he was very big over here. And it was going to be on his show. He was going to play it, and around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it was going to be played. I mean, even to the minute, we almost got told when it was going to be played. So it would be the first time on radio. And I remember we were on the Underground at the time. Well, it's a little transistor radio, a tiny little radio. And of course, when you're on the Underground, it's not coming through. And I remember this, Chad, the next stop where we got off, where it was overground, we got off the train, huddled around this little transistor radio to listen to our record being played for the first time on national radio. I'll never forget that.
Yeah,
it's a great feeling, right?
I remember listening to my transistor radio.
Oh boy, little tinny things.
Yeah.
I think that goes a long way to me being quite deaf these days. I used to go to sleep of a night with a transistor radio glued to my right ear, whether it was Radio Luxembourg or whatever, just listening and listening, and I'd fall asleep listening to that stuff. It was great.
Yep. I wanted to, before we move forward, I wanted to mention a few other Focal Track point tracks that I really like. Some of these were unearthed on that compilation. Miss Sinclair, that's a nice song with layered vocals, great composition.
That's an early one. I recall that one being, I think when Paul and Dave originally approached us to form a band with them, I seem to recall, Ted may back me up on this, I remember there were 6 songs that they wanted us to do. Brian Epstein, Terry Doran wanted us to record, and Sinclair was one of them. Far Away from Forever, Girl on the Corner might have been one of them as well, I think, if I recall correctly. But I do recall Miss Sinclair being one of them. And right from the start, I thought this is a good song.
Yeah,
I liked it. Nice feel to it. I thought, yeah, and the lyrics, they were good with the lyrics as well, weren't they, Dave and Paul? Nice lyrics as well, yeah. And Tales from the GPO Files was another one.
Right.
Well,
that was you just mentioned. You're psychic there. You just mentioned two more I was going to bring up. Far Away from Forever.
Yeah.
I'm always drawn to the more moody songs.
Yeah,
like that, and that's right up my alley. And then Tales from the GPO Files. All right, explain what are GPO files.
Okay. Those days in the UK, we had the GP was the General Post Office, right? I think so, Ted. And
I used to work for them.
Okay, oh, there we go. And all communications would go through the GPO. So the lyrics now, I think this girl, she's not heard from her boyfriend all day, and she's worrying as to why she hasn't heard from him. Is he okay? And it's and it's basically about she's waiting to hear from him, but the communication would go through the GPO at the time. Is what I think it was about. I don't know if you've got enlightened me anymore on that one, Seth. That's
no,
what
not really. No,
yeah,
not really.
that's what they call it. Tales from GPO Files.
Yeah, no, I
love story.
No, Far Away from Forever was a favorite of mine as well. I really like that.
Also,
and you're right about Miss Sinclair. Sinclair, that was an early tune.
Yeah,
Definitely.
there were 6 of them. I remember there were 6. They had the 6. They had the 6. Reflections was another one, and they were recorded just to Paul and Dave vocals, 2 acoustic guitars, and that's what we had to work with. And from there we could work, mold it as a band, those songs.
Yeah.
And then we recorded them at in Apple, in the Baker Street studio there.
I'll tell you one more. Lonely Woman. Did you mention that? Did you?
No, that could have been. You know what?
That's a great track.
Yeah, it is. And I asked. Actually, Ted was talking about jazz, modern jazz. I hadn't caught up with it at that point. And Dave, about the song "Lonely Woman," I said to David, "I like this, a good song, like it." He said, "We got the title from Ornette Coleman's track." Now, Ornette Coleman had an album, "The Shape of Jazz to Come." It was a quartet, and they were really quite far out for the time. And "Lonely Woman" was the opening track on that album, and that's where they got the idea for the song. Song can come from titles. You could have a couple of words that you could develop a song from that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's where that's how they were inspired to write that song, based upon an Ornette Coleman jazz album.
Okay, this is all interesting. I love to hear the background on where songs came from and the development and that. So you guys signed with NEMS Publishing at this point. NEMS.
Was it Apple Publishing? We were with Apple Publishing, and NEMS may have been connected to it because Brian Epstein ran NEMS music store in Liverpool. There was the big music shop in Liverpool at the time, 60s, mid 60s onwards, was NEMS Enterprises, and they sold in the basement with a record store, and you could listen in the booths and to the songs, and they also sold electrical equipment as well, or hi-fi systems. I think they even sold washing machines, I'm not sure, but there was televisions. They definitely sold televisions, yeah. So NEMS Enterprises was linked to Brian Epstein. So perhaps that's the link there. I don't know exactly what, but I just recall we were published by Apple.
Does anybody know, trivia question, does anybody know what NEMS stands for?
Nope.
It's North End Music Store,
Okay. Okay.
because they started out in the North End of Liverpool.
I think actually the other claim to fame for NEMS also, it was the place where when the Beatles were new, had just been signed to Brian, it's where Pete Best had to go to be told he was no longer a Beatle. And it was, I think it was in the offices in NEMS in Whitechapel. Whitechapel is in the centre of Liverpool.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's got yeah, a bit of history.
Okay. Well, you guys, okay, so in the summer of '69, the band split. How did you both feel about that at that time? What was going through your minds at that time?
Sad, disappointed, because we knew there was talent there and good songs, and just hoping that things would work out, you know. And unfortunately, obviously, they didn't, you know, in our favor. But, you know, I do regret that we didn't get the opportunity to go a bit further to see what we could have produced as a band with Focal Point, you know. It's like everything else. I know when Paul and Dave Rhodes approached me and to tell me about what they had, it was just like dangling a carrot in front of a donkey.
Right.
You know, you mentioned London, recording, the Beatles. Who wouldn't go for that? You know.
I do recall, though, at the time, it was a bit frustrating. It was very disappointing. Of course, it was a golden opportunity. And I'm trying to think, have we flunked it, or is it down to the Beatles? Is it down to this, down to that? Trying to apportion blame. And at the end of the day, we weren't the only ones who were missing out or losing out here. I think we could have done more, I think, as well. It wasn't just down to the bad luck, if you will, because the Beatles were not talking to each other at this point. You know, they were now starting to, and I think they still had Baker Street, but they were moving out of Baker Street at the time, I think, going elsewhere. I recall, but what I do recall is, well, we were living hand to mouth here, Greg. We were getting very little back out of it, and I thought, well, at least when I go back to Liverpool, I get 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
I'll be able to not worry too much about living hand to mouth. You know, so in that sense, there was relief as well as disappointment. I think that's what it was, really, you know. And thankfully, young enough to bounce back to a certain extent, you know.
I can remember when we had to move out of Whistler Street because they stopped paying the rent for us.
Yeah.
Do you remember where we ended up?
Lordship Lane, yeah, I do remember that. We were in a flat in Lordship Lane, and at that point, we weren't on a retainer. We were on a retainer up to that point. Apple were paying for us to survive, basically, paying the rent on the property in Whistler Street, paying for any expenses we needed for food, for the clothes and the gear and everything else. So we were really, in that sense, we didn't have to worry too much about the money side of it. But when we got to Lordship Lane, we were on our own.
Yeah.
And there was the record had bombed, and there was nothing going on really recording wise. We weren't writing music either. The lads were not writing music at the time. None of us were doing much in the terms of writing music. Maybe 1 or 2 little bits and pieces, but nothing great. And so it was a time then when we got to Lordship Lane. I felt we've got to move on. We're going nowhere here. It's time to move on, basically, and we couldn't move back because that Apple was, as I say, was coming to an end anyway. It didn't.
I can remember we had. Well, I don't know if you remember it all, Dave, but I can recall once we were at Lordship Lane. I remember the apartment being above a motorcycle shop, And
Yeah.
right on the other side of the road was a pub.
Oh, yeah, I remember
And we'd
that.
spend a lot, remember the pub? And I recall spending a lot of days in there just living on like beans on toast, you know, and we had to
Yeah, I
sign
remember
on,
that those days. Yeah.
you know, you had to sign on the unemployment because we weren't getting any financial, like Dave said, from Apple anymore, unfortunately.
They weren't going to pay forever. They were some return on it, you know. And to be honest with you, then who would have thought now this you know, like, I've worked the sums out before, and I think it's about 54 years when we we first recorded.
Yeah.
Most of the people around today on the planet were never even born then.
Right.
No, yeah.
And so it's quite weird, really, in a way, to think that we, you know, you see the music now, and thanks to yourself as well. You see it on YouTube more so now, but it used to be played also at an annual event in London for psychedelic music, if you like. So you get Sycamore Sid played there, you get the Far Away from Red stuff. You wouldn't get Girl in the Corner, but they used to every year they'd have the get together, and we got wind of that. We got told about that, and then after that, and actually we're now going into the 2000s, and it was then said, well, this record company approached us to say, let's put some of the music out. That's when the compilation started to come out as well, because people were asking for the song Sycamore Sid, because we're getting played at this convention every year, at this psychedelic music convention.
I wanted to bring this up real quick. You talked about like 54 years. The Queen's passing, okay? There are people, I mean, you know, elderly people that only knew the Queen, you know.
Absolutely.
And never knew a king, you know, until now. You know, so it's like one person that I interviewed, he talked about his dad made their first television set, and he watched the coronation on you know, the Queen, and I thought about that. Wow, you know, I mean, there are people today that's all they've known is the Queen, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's all we'd ever known, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I can recall watching the coronation in, what was it, 53, on a black and white TV in my mum and dad's house and so on. And nobody has ever reigned for so long in a country, and it will never be again, never will be. You know, whether it's now King Charles or whatever, because he's in his early 70s. So no, it's a huge. I think I'm not a big loyalist. You know, I'm not sort of rah for the king, the queen, and royalty and so on. But I personally think they did do a lot of good for the country in stability, you know, and they did a lot as well. You know, a lot of people think, oh, they just sit in Buckingham Palace or Windsor and so on and live off the land. It's like, no, they did a lot for the country, and it was a huge shock. I mean, when she passed, but not a shock because of her age. You know, it was going to happen in the next couple of years anyway. You can only live so long, you know. But I think if you watched anything of the funeral and the build up to it and so on, I think it really brought the country together. You know, that's just me. What do you think, Dave?
Pass on this one. I'm not a huge fan.
Well,
I was never a huge fan, and
right.
My views haven't changed since whenever.
Well, let's get back to music. Ted, you went on to play with the Mersey Beats. You mentioned that earlier too. The Mersey Beats.
But that was in that was in 1979. I joined them, but after I left Focal Point, I was just obviously still young and was hungry and just wanted to play and play and play. So even after we came back to Liverpool, you know, I just joined the band. I can't remember. I remember being in a band called Keith's Kind, and I don't remember too much about it at all. But in the early 70s, there was a band going around Liverpool called Rocking Horse. You'll remember them, Dave, I guess.
Yes, I do too.
Familiar name, yeah. I don't remember much about them, but I remember the name.
Sorry?
I don't remember much about them. I just remember the name.
Well, what it was at the time, it was a 5-piece band. It was basically a rock band, but they had 4-part harmonies. So they do stuff by the likes of the Little River Band and just nail the tunes. Absolutely great, you know. And they were all accomplished musicians as well. So anyway, long story short, I heard they were looking for a drummer. And back then, they had, I believe, 4 weekly residencies in different pubs that they played in and around Liverpool. And they were very much a musician's band, because 98% of the people that went to see Rocking Horse were musicians, and they kind of looked up to them as a band, you know. And I thought I'd love to be in that band, you know. So I followed them around, unbeknownst to them, for a month to all the different residencies in the pubs they played, because it's not a band you could just sit in with and jam and play. And I learned all their tunes, I learned all the arrangements. And when it was time to come for the auditions, I knew the bass player in the band quite well. And so I think that gave me a bit of a foot in the door. And the audition itself was like a cattle call. There was like 30 or 40 drummers there, all on the same day, playing the same 2 or 3 tunes, you know. So I went in and I played whatever tunes they called. And they seemed to like it, you know. And it was towards the end of the day, so the band were getting real tired, you know. And so Stan said, "Do you want to play another tune?" So I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, what do you want to play?" I said, you call the tune, I'll play it. And I never, ever to this day, I never told them how I learned all the material and so on. But I wanted to join that band so badly that I made sure well, to the best of my ability, I got the job, you know. And I did join the band. I played with them for a couple of years. But up until the late 70s, yeah, through a friend of mine, a guitar player from Liverpool, he knew the drummer from the Mersey Beats. I think it was a guy called Phil Chittick, I think it was his name. And my friend had heard that he was leaving the band and the Mersey Beats were looking for a new drummer. So I said, "I'm interested, count me in," you know, because up until that point, I'd never worked with a pro band before, like going on the road professional as a living. And so my friend made a couple of phone calls and got back to me, said, "Phone this number and speak to whoever." And it turned out to be Tony Crane, who was the founder of the Mersey Beats, who are still going today, by the way. And I had to go down, I think it was on Duke Street in Liverpool, to a club you may remember, Dave, called Uglies.
Yeah, I remember it. Yep.
Remember that?
Never
Well,
played
I had
it,
to
but
go
remember
down
it,
there. Yeah. I went down there to audition, and all I remember is going in during the day, because the club, it was a nightclub, so the club was closed during the day. And I set up my drums, and we just played mostly the Mersey Beats hits and some of the covers that they used to play. And he just said, "When can you start?" So I was assuming that he'd have other auditions to do. And that was early February 79. And I think about 3 days later, I was up and running. I was on the road with them, you know. And for me, it was luxury, because we had a road manager. And it was a 5-piece band. We had keyboards and everything. And we had a road manager who not only drove us around, but he unpacked, set up all the equipment, and then at the end of the night, tore all the equipment down, packed it away. All I had to do was show up on stage with stage gear, pair of drumsticks and play. So for me, that was luxury, you know, and
Right.
I've never had it since, unfortunately. And the only reason I left the Mersey Beach because I ended up emigrating here to Canada
Right.
in mid to late 83.
We jump over to Dave. Dave, you went into business with Paul and Tim, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We continued with the Focal Point name, and we got a band together. We got I forget the drummer now. We got a drummer, and yeah, we went on the road, but we were playing in local clubs. We never developed further than that. But at that point, it was really, for me, it was more to do with the songwriting. So I was getting very heavily involved in the songwriting at that point. And I dabbled in it earlier as well. And I never, unlike Ted, I didn't get into a professional band. I didn't look for a professional band, but would have been great. Mersey Beats were a really great band. And but we stayed in touch with Lionel Morton, who'd been he was our producer, if you like, and then stroke engineer in London days. And Lionel was in a successful band in the 60s called the Four Pennies. Now the Four Pennies, don't know about in the States, but over here they had a massive #1 with a song called Juliet.
Yeah.
And to the point where, you know, couples were naming their children Juliet. The girls. And,
even if it was a boy.
Well, maybe now. Yeah, I don't know about then. Yeah, and really, really big. So we stayed in touch. Paul and I stayed in touch with Lionel, and we spent time with him. He'd come up here and spend time with me up here. And this is 70s now, late 70s, 80s maybe. And he'd said he wanted to reform the Four Pennies with myself and Paul. So he came up here, and we still had to have a drummer as well. But Paul and I, we thought about it. We thought, is it worth giving up? Now we were steady incomes coming in. We had commitments like family, mortgages, things like that. Is it worth taking a chance with Lionel and the music business to go out on the road as the Four Pennies? And we decided against it in the end. But it didn't stop us staying in touch with Lionel. And we worked with Lionel after that. We went into I wrote a song called Goodbye Forever, and we went down to Olympic Studios in London and recorded it there, and Lionel was there with us as well, so he helped us produce it. He actually sang on it, and we played on one of it. It was a deal with Olympic. We went in and we paid for half the session. It was an overnight session. Half of it was with doing our song, and half of it was doing Lionel's. He had a new song, a Dave Mason song that he was recording. I remember that. And so we worked with him on that. We worked with him from time to time after that. And you know, I'm still in touch with him, you know, up to fairly recently. But I wasn't back, and I played also. You know, we did a fair bit of recording as well in the 70s, which some of it came out on an album called Liverpool in My Soul. Although that was recorded a lot later, but the material, a lot of it was from that era, the 70s, 80s era that we were, and there was no outlet for it then. We didn't have an outlet. We didn't have a deal with any company or anything like that. We just had this songwriting deal with Wayne Bickerton. Yeah. And so that's what our emphasis was on, writing material, writing songs.
Right. Well, let me ask you, jumping ahead a few years, the Kissing Spell releasing the first bite of the apple, that comprehensive collection. Did you guys know the details about this and how it came about, or were you just surprised as anybody else when it was released?
I knew about it through Paul. See, Paul, although Paul didn't move back, Paul moved back to Liverpool briefly after the Focal Point, with the main Focal Points here in the 60s into 1970. But he then moved down south. He moved to London, outside London, the suburbs. And he was in had meetings with Wayne Bickerton. Okay. And at that point, so he would go out for meals with Wayne, you know, and the families would go out together, and he kept in touch with Wayne regularly. And Wayne had a lot of contacts, a huge number of contacts. He was a successful producer, big name in the music industry, certainly here. And yeah, so Kiss and Spell, there was some of our stuff turned up on compilation albums over the years.
Right.
You know, psychedelic, you know, DRAM days and psychedelic this, or quite a few bits. And so Kiss and Spell said they wanted to gather it all together, put an album together. And Paul said to me, "This is what they're planning to do." I said, "Great, okay, fine, let's go with it. We've got nothing to lose, have we? Let's be honest." And I did okay, actually. In terms of being an unknown band, more or less, it sold okay, and particularly in Japan, because anything Beatles was big in Japan, and so, you know, on the back of the Beatles, it got interest, it sparked interest, and so much so that they decided they wanted to put in Kiss and Spell another album out, and that's when we put the Liverpool in My Soul album out. So that's the Focal Point's name. At that point, it was only myself and Paul, and Tim was on some of it as well. But that was, you know, that could have been a better album. For me, it was rushed. More time could have been spent on that. But Kiss and Spell wanted another product on the coattails of First Bite.
Right. Did you notice after the release, were you getting any contact fan mail from fans or new fans? You know, because of that, did your fan base broaden any? Did you know?
I didn't hear about that. If we did, Paul might have heard all about that. I didn't hear about that. No, I don't know. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you did play in a reformed version of Focal Point. Did you play up until Paul's death?
I played after Paul's death. Yeah. Yeah. After Paul's death, the band was out playing on the road. Then we were gigging again. Completely different band, of course, but I was the only original member in the band. But we kept going. Oh no, Tim was with us as well. There were two of us, correction, and we kept going. And in 2011, I remember vividly, it was a good gig. We played this gig. It was in Liverpool City Centre. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not enjoying this now. 50 odd years later, I've decided I'm not enjoying it anymore. I thought, it's not going in the direction I want. We were more of a covers band, and the original material was being shoved to one side, and it's not what people wanted to hear, in fairness. So I thought, well, it's not as creative as I would like it to be. And I said, okay, and that's it for me. And I decided I quit in 2011, and I haven't played since then. I practice, you know, I still play, but for my own amusement.
Right.
You know, with Tim as well. I played with Tim a few times. We get together and, you know, work on a few things, but and songwriting, a bit of songwriting as well. But in terms of going out on the road, 2011, I call it a day. And they changed the band name after that, because there was nobody left in the band who was in the original focus. Tim had gone by that as well, you know. So they changed the band name, and you know, they concentrated all covers. They were an all covers band, but they're great musicians, really, really great musicians.
Well, Ted, what took you to Toronto? We'll be going back a few years, I guess. Why the move to Toronto?
Well, I guess at the time it would have been the Christmas and New Year of 1982, going into 83. The guitar player friend of mine from Liverpool, who I've played in bands with for many years, he was the one that put my name forward for the Merseybeats gig. He was married at the time, and they were living, him and his wife were living in Canada, and they were doing a duo thing. He's a guitar player, and she played keyboards, but they didn't have a bass player in the band. Unfortunately, she played keyboards, a left-hand bass on the keyboards, which didn't work out too well. But anyway, they came over one Christmas for a visit to the UK, and they came to visit us, my wife and I, over Christmas for the dinner, and we were just chit-chatting away. They were asking me how things were going, And at the time, for me, the economy wasn't that particularly good in the UK. We were living in a nice house in a nice area, and times were a little tough. You know, we had 2 young kids, and it just came up in conversation. Have you ever thought about emigrating? So it's like, no. So I said, why? You know, I've never been to Canada on a vacation at all.
Mhm.
And he said, well, if you're ever interested and you want to make a move, we'll help sponsor you to come into the country, into Canada legally. And so long story short, they went back home after Christmas, and my wife and I were talking it over amongst ourselves. And at some point, somebody said, well, why don't you just give it a try? If you don't like it, you can come home, type of thing, you know, back to the UK. So it turns out that I'll say they had a duo. So they offered me, the drummer, job in the band to make it a full live trio, you know. And we had to go through all the immigration interviews in the UK, the Canadian consulate and so on. And I ended up coming over here in late September, 83. And my wife, we had the house to sell. So my wife and the 2 young kids, she had to stay and sell the house.
Right.
So in the short, we were apart for about 11 and a half months, never saw each other.
Mm.
And at some point, things went sour in the band, you know, not my fault, but things went sour as things occasionally do. So I left the band, and I was going to come back home to the UK, you know, and my wife said, don't you dare come home, you know. Let's sell the house. I want to get over to Canada. And I think it was middle of August 84, we sold the house, and she came over with the kids, and 39 years later, we're still here. You know, we wouldn't have, I miss the UK a heck of a lot,
Mhm.
you know, but if we'd have stayed there, I don't know, we wouldn't have what we have here now in our lifestyle,
Okay.
you know. So, you know, it wasn't something that was planned originally. And I never ever thought I'd be moving to another country to live, but it was a good move to me, you know.
Well, right.
And I've met a lot of great musicians since I've been over here, and you know,
Well, you do
it's
get,
good.
you do get to go back and visit, though, right, from time to time.
Sorry. Oh,
Oh,
back to the UK.
Yeah, you
Oh,
get
yeah.
to go back to visit. That's
Yeah.
good.
Well, until the pandemic kicked in, we
Right.
were due to go back to the UK for the visit. We had a big, we were going to be going to Croatia on a holiday, and then over to the UK to see our friends. And obviously that's on hold.
Right.
And
You did call over once, didn't you? I remember you came over once when Tim and I met up with you a few
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago. And we went around the Cavern and the great pub where the Beatles used to drink between sets at the Cavern.
Don't go away.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
There's the
Okay.
picture.
There you go.
Yeah.
See, I've been doing my homework.
Yes, you have.
Yeah,
No, I thoroughly enjoyed that time when we were over there with you guys.
that's great.
You know,
First time we met up for years, wasn't it?
absolutely.
Since the
Absolutely.
Focal Point days. Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant.
But we do have our brick in the wall, don't we?
Oh, we've got a brick in the wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the back, opposite the Cavern. Bands that played on the Cavern would have their names engraved in a brick at the wall opposite
Really?
the Cavern. And our name, we're up there. Yeah.
You're up there. Wow.
Yeah. It's our claim to fame.
Have you taken a picture of it? You need to take a picture.
Yeah, it's actually it's circulating, isn't it? I think online somewhere. I think I've seen it somewhere on one of the websites. It's
Yeah. I've got a good clear picture of it. I could email it to you, Greg.
Oh yeah, I would like to see that.
You
I
know,
would like to see that.
in
Yeah.
fact, a neighbor of mine who lives 4 doors away from me here,
Mhm.
he's got family back in Scotland, and he went over to the UK and up to Scotland for the visit earlier this year. And I told him about the Cavern. He'd never been to Liverpool, so I told him what places to go and see and this, that, and the other. And I happened to mention to him about this brick in the wall. I said, I think it's like 5 bricks from the top and towards the right side. And he emailed me while he was over there and took a picture of it. So, you know, that was pretty cool.
I know where I am here in Liverpool, south end of Liverpool. It's Beatles territory because they were all, you know, their early years were here. And anybody coming over that we knew from the States, particularly, and Canada, the first thing they wanted to do, take me around the Beatles sites. I had to take them to, you know, John's, Auntie Mimi's house in Menlo, Paul's house in just off Mother Avenue, Forthland Road.
Forthland Road, yeah.
Forthland. Ringo's in Toxteth, so we go there as well, and George's house was in Speak. And then Penny Lane. They always wanted to go to Penny Lane to get a photograph next to the Penny Lane sign. So that was religiously, people wanted to do that when they came over here. It's quite a big tourist attraction still, the Beatles here. And there is an open deck, double decker bus that takes tourists around. Strawberry Fields, for instance, is not far away from here. And Bob Dylan actually went on one of the tours as well.
Okay.
That bus. Yeah, a few years ago.
You know what's ironic about all this, though, and Focal Point's connection with the Beatles? I've met all the Beatles except Ringo.
Mhm.
And being a drummer, I just find it kind of ironic. So it's
Yeah.
kind of on my bucket list. I would love to meet him. That's all.
At Apple, going back to the early days, Greg, I remember Apple when we were living there practically, Baker Street office, you know, and recording there. And I remember we were wandering around somewhere in the office. I remember Dick James's music was in the same building as Brian Epstein's side of it, and he had Dratleaf music, and it was the Cream and the Bee Gees were with Dick James. And I remember we could just listen to their music all day. So they were quite close then, Epstein and Dick James, I think. I don't know whether they would, you know, they were actually contractually obliged to sign to each other, but they did work in the same building. I just remembered, and Jerry Marsden recorded some early, his later stuff there, Jerry and the Pacemakers. So yeah, there is a connection that was there then. I do remember vividly listening to some of the Bee Gees stuff that was never, you know, wasn't released. Take 17 of a track, one of the track, you know, of Robin Gibbs. I remember that, you know, take 17, okay, take 18. And, you know, this one song, and those were the days, as I say, where you couldn't just jump in, drop in, and join. You had to do the whole thing again. If you fluffed your nose, you started again.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. The Bee Gees, that's another whole area too. I mean, they were, I mean, such accomplished writers and musicians and harmonizing. And I love all of their stuff, even the disco. You know, I mean, it's all good. It's all.
Yeah, they reinvented themselves. They reinvented themselves with the disco, didn't they? John Travolta and the period, that era. It was fantastic. Yeah.
Great songs, great
pretty
production.
melodies.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you the anecdotes, to be honest with you, Greg, that things like I can recall if you want all this, if it's of interest to people. It's you know, I think with being linked with the McCartney family, we actually moved in to the house adjoining his Auntie Ginny's house. He had two aunties, Auntie Ginny and Auntie Millie. And Ginny was she was I used to go in there when I got back from the days when we were down in London, doing nothing really, looking for what my next gig or whatever. I go and sit with Ginny often. She had a lot of Beatles paraphernalia in the room because they were very, very big at the time, and they were big in the States as well at the time. But I do recall one particular occasion I was sat there with, and she'd said, you know, and they would say all the songs were I love you, she loves you, from me to you, bum, 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 and all that. Please, please. She said, one day, she said, I said to our Paul, will you write something which out love me in this without you, me, love you? This is Ginny's story. And then he came up with Paperback Writer. And she put that down to her, telling him to start writing something without love me, I love you in the actual verse, you know, in the lyrics. Well, that's true or not, I don't know. But it wasn't their bestseller, let's put it that way. It wasn't a good seller for them, as Beatles sales go, you know.
Wow. Well, funny enough, since I've been living in Canada, I've actually played in the Beatles tribute band, you know, and it was a band called the Brittles, Britles, and they covered the early touring years. So they did everything from like 62 to 66.
Mhm.
And I always used to really, really appreciate the Beatles more once they'd recorded Revolver,
Yes.
and then Sgt. Pepper and the White Album. And, you know, the earlier stuff to me didn't do a whole heck of a lot, because in their early days it was love song, Moon and June type of stuff, rhyming, you know.
Right.
But when I played with this band, this tribute band, all we did was the earlier stuff, you know, and it gave me a much better appreciation for the songs back then.
They were great songs, I thought. Yeah.
You know, I'd never, you know, I mean, the likes of your Sgt. Pepper and the White Album and Abbey Road, they're just, to me, they're just killer albums, brilliant. They'll be around forever. But the earlier stuff was a bit poppier, and at the time, didn't do a whole heck of a lot for me. But since when I played with that band for a couple of years, it's like I just got a much better appreciation for how good the songs really were, and they weren't always simple 2 and 3 chord songs.
Well constructed songs. For me, they were really, really good. I always liked them. Very melodic. That was a really melodic period for the Beatles, I thought. With I'm thinking of Hard Day's Night, Help. I'm thinking of really Help album and Hard Day's Night. Yeah, those 2 albums, they really had some really nice melodic material on.
Absolutely. I know that now.
As they got older, you know, as they got on, you know, like Sgt. Pepper, for instance, and a lot of the White Album. I thought some of the White Album, we didn't need it. I thought it was a little bit too, I know, probably this is sacrilege, but some of the tracks I wasn't too keen on. There were great songs on it, and the others I don't care if I hear them again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's how I
No,
felt about it.
I fully agree with you, Dave. I mean, you think a double album is a lot of songs on 2 LPs. You know, there's always going to be stuff that's going to be a little bit of a filler type
You have your
thing.
gems on it. While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Oh,
Absolute gem. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you have other things on it. I wasn't too keen on them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it just
It's a personal choice. Personal.
Yeah, that's all it is. Yeah. Well. Greg's patiently waiting for more.
You want to, Ted, you want to talk about Odd November?
Yeah, that's a band local to where I live here. I joined them about 2.5 years ago. And it's a 4-piece classic rock cover band. No originals, no nothing, you know. And the material they were doing, I've always been that way inclined, rockier stuff, not heavy rock and heavy metal, but, you know, like the title says and implies, it's classic rock, you know. And so I met up with them, we had a coffee, and one thing led to another, and I joined the band, and we did a couple of gigs. Unfortunately, again, the pandemic kicked a lot of it in the head, you know. But we still get together occasionally and rehearse at the bass player's house. It was only about maybe 25 minutes from where I live here, you know. And a couple of months ago, I started having some little health issues. And I just felt I couldn't commit to the band, and I need to, need to get myself sorted out health-wise, which I'm glad to say is doing okay at the moment, So I thought I didn't want to hold the band back, left on the best of terms. I didn't want to leave, but who knows, I might go back to them one day. I don't know, they were a good bunch of guys, good musicians, and fun to be around,
Well, one of the members, I'm glad, forwarded my email to you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm glad he did, or else we wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, I think that would have been Rob, the bass player,
Okay,
because he
well,
normally took care of the website, etc., for the band.
I think so too. I think that's right. I think that's right. But I was a little bit, your email back to me, I don't know, not put off, I wouldn't say that, but I was like, why are you interested in us after all these years? Your question. And I thought, does he think I'm up to something? Does he think I want to I want to expose these guys? And I thought, wow, I've never had that question before. What why are you interested in us?
Yeah,
So
no,
I
I
think-
was just, well, for something that happened like 54 years ago,
right,
and to
right,
be in another country, and then to
right.
get the email from you being in another country again, I was
Right.
curious more than anything, because at that point I didn't know that you'd interviewed other musicians in bands and so on
Right.
for your website. So I was curious and interested to know, okay, what do you know about Focal Point? Where did you hear about them? Because I think there is a band out of California, I think, called Focal Point, but
Right.
they're like I think they're a heavy rock band.
Right. I think you're right. Yeah. There was
Yeah.
another band.
So I was just
Heavy,
curious
yeah,
and
heavy
interested as to how you got into Focal Point.
Mhm.
I thinking about, you can't believe people are still interested in this day and age after so many years. I remember I spent some time down in Cornwall, which is the far tip of the country, southwest of the country. I think I told Ted this story. I was in a supermarket, right? And this place, it's only a small place. And there's a guy there looking at the records rack, and I'm looking at the record rack, and he'd be talking, and he said, "You play music?" I said, "Well, I used to be in a band called Focal Point." Focal Point, it's an honor. And he's putting his hand out and double handshake, and I'm thinking, my God, is he having me on? So I was thinking, what is this? Yeah, he knew the music, and this guy must have been, he's about in his 50s, I think, at the time, and a few years ago now. But I thought, this is in a far corner of this island. Thought, wow. So some people know about it. So yeah, I can see that there is still an interest in it.
That's right. You never know. You never know who you're reaching.
Yeah,
that's true.
You never know how far reaching your music is, and how many years it's lived. Lived on.
The latest one for me is on a YouTube site, Far Away from Forever, you mentioned before. The bass line I put down for that, if you go onto Far Away from Forever Focal Point, you'll see next to it there's a guy who's actually got a Fender 6-string jazz bass, and he's actually recorded his own jazz bass on top of my bass, and it's down there now on YouTube. And he's added a couple of little extras to it, but it's our song in the background. And that's recent. That's in the last year or so, I think.
I saw that when you told me about it recently.
Did you find it? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Really strange.
What to say? I was blown away.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. An anecdote I can quickly tell you. I think I mentioned it to Dave a few months back now. The last company I worked for before I retired, my boss was of English descent, and he was heavily into music. He liked a lot of blues music, but he was into music heavily anyway. So he was out one day with his wife for a drive on a weekend, and he went into this store. I don't know whether it was a thrift store type of thing or what. And he found this CD. And as soon as he saw the name, he said, I think it was $1 or $2 or something. he picked it up and brought it back with him. And it was from a little town with about 500 people living there that he found this CD. And I went into work on the Monday morning, and on the desk, on my desk, was this CD that said, what was it? Liverpool, You're in My Soul, which I had nothing to do with, although it's a folk song, because this was in the early 2000s type of thing. But I thought, how ironic that, you know, my boss would be going to this little one-hit town in the middle of nowhere, you know, and he finds a Focal Point CD. That was amazing. So he said, I had to get it for you, you know, which I thought was a nice little touch of him to do that, you know. And like you say, you never know in the world where things are going to pop up.
Right. And I'll say this too, a little bit about, and I shared it with you. You may have shared it with Dave too, what Tending the Pale Bloom is about. And there's my logo behind me too. Oops.
Yeah,
I got to go backwards.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Anyway, but that's what it's about. A lot of these artists, musicians that were maybe at one point in time were a little popular, or not so much these days, you know. But it's like going back and watering and nurturing a little bit that bloom, that, you know, to help it to blossom, and maybe giving exposure to those artists today, to today's listeners, and you know, giving that, maybe helping to broaden the audience a little bit, and that it's rewarding to me. It's definitely.
That's a great story, Greg. That's really really good. I like that. I never thought, where does that come from? But now you've explained it. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, great. Absolutely poetic.
Wow. I know I've seen some of your interviews on YouTube, Greg, and I have to say you do a lot of research, and some of these artists that you find and bands and so on, that even obscure to me, even out of the UK, that obscure to me, and I'm thinking, I thought I knew a fair bit about music and so on, but you know, you've opened my eyes and ears to a lot of stuff that I'd never heard of before.
Right, I'm going to have to wrap it up in a minute, if you don't mind, Greg.
Yeah, I was hinting to that earlier, saying you guys were.
Dave, is it your bedtime already?
Well, it's getting there. It's my tea. It's 7 a.m. Getting dark out here.
I noticed while we were talking, when Dave was on, I noticed the sun starting to go down.
Yeah,
you know, I could see it.
Yeah, you can see it. Yeah, I know. Yes. I'll put the lights on here now. Carry on.
Exactly.
No, I'm gonna have to go, guys. So I've got to say, fantastic. Thank you so much.
This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it today.
Really great. Trip down memory lane, and you know, it was really. I've forgotten a lot of what it was. You know, it's only when we're talking now. And no doubt when I go away, I'll think,
you'll remember that. Yeah.
You would have liked to know about that, because there's so many stories. But
you
know, the essence of what we did, how it went, how we felt, I think is hopefully there for you.
Yeah, I think we got that today. Yeah,
I think so too. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to.
Very welcome. Very
And,
welcome, Greg. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed seeing your face finally, Greg. And seeing you again, Dave.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yeah, how great is this Zoom, eh? It's great, isn't it? We're in 3 different countries here, and it's like we've been in the same room together.
Right? I've never even heard of Zoom. That's how old school I am.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's easy for us. It's Greg's got to set it up, haven't you? Because it's all that hyperlink.
Yeah,
I've got a little bit of editing to do to kind of cut it down to a watchable. You know, but I've had some 2-hour. This will probably be around 2 or longer. So it's like watching a movie. It's going to be like watching a movie, you know.
Wow.
We look forward to seeing it.
Yep. Surely, surely. Thank you guys again, and thank you,
Thank you, Greg.
thank you,
Much
Ted,
appreciated. You
for
take care.
passing it on, and thank you for participating, David, too.
Okay, I
Thank you.
appreciate the time you've taken as well, Greg.
Yeah,
Okay.
really do. Thank you, Greg. Much appreciated.
Surely.
Okay,
Enjoyed it.
bye-bye.